Charleston, South Carolina, a city where the cobblestone streets echo with tales of old wars, ancestral pride, and the haunting remnants of injustice. Grand old mansions stand beside moss-covered walls, whispering secrets no one dares to speak aloud. Behind every oak tree and beneath every brick, there's a story waiting to be told. But none would rival the one about to unfold inside Courtroom A of Charleston's County Courthouse. On a soft-lit fall morning, the kind that turns the dew into diamonds on window panes, Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the courthouse steps. She wore no robe, no flashy designer suit. Instead, a calm, clean outfit that spoke of humility, resolve, and strength. Her very presence was quiet yet unignorable. For those who saw her, they noticed something else, a storm in her eyes. One built from years of watching justice delayed, and sometimes denied. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just any black woman. She was a United States Congresswoman. And today, she wasn't here to make a speech. She was here to draw a line. Inside, the courtroom was as tense as a match about to strike. Everyone was already seated. Reporters scribbled in notepads. Lawyers whispered strategies. The audience murmured, until she entered. A hush, a sudden vacuum of noise. A pause, as if the air recognized her presence before the people did. She walked with calm assurance, each heel tapping against the marble like a countdown. All eyes turned, some in curiosity, others in doubt, a few with hostility. Among them, Travis Boone, veteran officer, decorated, feared, proud. He stood with a clipboard at the prosecution's table, fixing his tie, expecting a routine hearing. He had seen women like Jasmine before, or so he thought. But he didn't know Jasmine. Not truly. To him, she was just another voice to silence. Another case to bury. Another moment to reinforce the power he'd worn like a second skin for decades. As Jasmine approached the center aisle, the bailiff instinctively nodded, as if recognizing something regal, though no title had been announced. She stopped. The room inhaled. And then, a slap. Hard, sudden, loud enough to stop time. The crowd gasped. The sound ricocheted like thunder against the wooden panels. Travis Boone had slapped Jasmine Crockett. Not metaphorically, not verbally, physically. A hand, raised by a man who wore the badge of power, had struck a woman who wore the spirit of justice. And in that moment, the courtroom didn't just pause. It ruptured. Faces turned white. Pens dropped. Cameras clicked. And yet, Jasmine did not flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She stared directly into Boone's eyes, unmoving. Her cheek burned, but her spirit didn't. Silence took over. Not the kind that is peaceful, but the kind that is waiting for a revolution. Everyone wondered the same thing. What will she do? And Jasmine, with the weight of 1,000 injustices on her shoulders, asked herself a different question. Could I change this? Or will I be another name in a file that history forgets? Boone stepped back, slightly dazed by his own action. As if the weight of his hand surprised even him. His pupils shrank. His body tensed. He had expected rage, resistance, maybe even tears. Instead, Jasmine Crockett stood as still as a monument to every black woman who had ever been silenced, ignored, dismissed. A woman who bore generations of pain, yet still stood tall. He tried to speak, but the air choked his voice. And in the corner of the courtroom, a single camera light blinked red. Recording, immortalizing, exposing. The judge had yet to speak. The bailiff had yet to move. No one knew how to proceed. Because Jasmine hadn't spoken, and her silence was louder than any gavel. Her stare, that was the first strike back. It wasn't laced with vengeance. It wasn't fueled by ego. It was surgical, precise, heavy with memory. Boone, though he wouldn't admit it, felt his gut tighten. Jasmine Crockett's eyes weren't eyes anymore. They were a ledger of wrongs, of names, of bruises, of protests, of whispered apologies and loud injustices. The judge finally moved. A gavel tapped, but it sounded dull against the lingering echo of the slap. "Order," he said softly. It wasn't a command. It was a request. Even he knew. This courtroom didn't belong to him anymore. Jasmine finally blinked. She turned to the gallery and saw faces, black, brown, pale, scared, curious. Some filled with rage, others frozen in disbelief, all waiting. And then she spoke. Not loud, not rushed, but clear. "Let the record reflect," she said, "that on this day, in this courtroom, the truth showed its face." The judge tried to intervene, but she continued. "I did not come here seeking conflict. I came here seeking accountability. And what I received was violence." Murmurs. The press scribbled faster. "Officer Boone," she said, turning to him, "you did not just strike me. You struck every woman who ever sat in silence. Every child who grew up fearing the very uniform you wear. Every man who begged for mercy and got none." Boone opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "You thought this room belonged to you. That justice was yours to bend. But let me make one thing clear." She stepped forward, not threatening, commanding. "Justice," she said, "belongs to the people." And just like that, the courtroom wasn't a place anymore. It was a movement. The courtroom remained silent, but the energy inside had shifted. It was no longer a place of law. It had become a battlefield of morality. The slap had cracked more than just skin. It cracked the illusion that justice in Charleston was blind. And now, everyone could see clearly. The judge, hesitant and visibly shaken, leaned forward. "Congresswoman Crockett, I." She raised her hand gently. A motion not of defiance but of quiet authority. "Your Honor, I appreciate the formality of your bench, but today I'm not here to argue procedure. I'm here to ensure the truth is no longer buried under protocol." Gasps echoed. The crowd shifted in their seats. Reporters raised cameras higher. A black mother in the third row clutched her son's hand. A retired public defender tilted forward, nodding slowly. Jasmine's words weren't just for Boone. They were for every soul in that room. Boone's face had lost its color. His fingers twitched nervously at his sides. Jasmine continued, "I've spent my career believing in this system, arguing within it, negotiating with it, but now I see it as it is. Cracked marble walls built to look impenetrable but hollow when tapped. You," she said, pointing to Boone, "are not the only one complicit. You are a symptom. The disease is deeper, older, smarter." The room stiffened. This courtroom has failed to convict guilty men who wore uniforms. Has silenced survivors in the name of order. Has favored those with badges over those with broken bones. A pause. "And yet, we call it justice." Her voice dropped, barely above a whisper, but everyone heard. "I call it betrayal." That evening, the courtroom transcript leaked. Within hours, Jasmine's speech, the slap, the stare, the unbroken defiance, was on every major news outlet. Twitter erupted. Hashtags like #StandWithJasmine and #CharlestonJustice began trending. But so did others, darker ones. Designed to discredit, to mock, to shift focus. At City Hall, a meeting was called. In a candlelit room thick with cigar smoke and unease, the chief of police, Nolan Graves, stood behind a desk. "She's igniting something we've worked decades to keep quiet." Beside him, DA Laramie folded his arms. "We can't afford this narrative. Especially not now. The election." Graves cut him off. "Control the fire before it spreads." Meanwhile, in a modest apartment on the east side of Charleston, Jasmine sat alone. The television was on mute, playing her own face on repeat. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages. Support from some, threats from others. Her eyes were tired, but her spirit was sharpening. What had begun as a courtroom appearance was now a war. Her mind returned to Boone. How many others had he hurt? How many files were sealed? How many voices silenced? She stood and walked to her desk. Laid out before her were records, names, dates, blurred testimonies. Pages redacted in black ink that felt more like dried blood. "I'll dig," she whispered to herself. "And I won't stop." The following morning, Jasmine stood outside the courthouse steps holding a single file. The press swarmed her. "Congresswoman, do you have a comment about Officer Boone?" Are you planning to file charges? Do you believe the courtroom is still a safe space for victims? She raised the file. In my hand, she said, is the case of a 15-year-old boy, Malik James, who was arrested 2 years ago by Officer Travis Boone. The charges were vandalism and resisting arrest. But the footage? It was never released. The boy was hospitalized, and the only testimony used against him was Boone's. She paused. Today, I demand that footage be made public. If it's lost, if it's corrupted, then I demand to know why a teenager's life was nearly destroyed by a man whose record is rotting with silence. The microphone surged forward. This is no longer about me, she said. It's about every name buried in paperwork, every mother who buried a child, every father forced to accept a settlement instead of justice. 3 days later, the protest began. Not one organized by Jasmine, but by the people who watched her. They came in silence first. A candlelight vigil across the courthouse lawn. Then louder. Voices rising with posters, with names of victims, with chants of, "Truth is not treason," and, "Justice is not just for them." Charleston had seen marches before. But not like this. This was not just outrage. This was awakening. And in the center of it all, Jasmine stood, not on a podium, but shoulder to shoulder with the people. She didn't hold a microphone. She held a folder. Inside it, a list of cases Boone had touched. Each one a potential fire waiting to be exposed. Of course, the system pushed back. Late-night break-ins at Jasmine's office. Files mysteriously deleted. A call from an anonymous number. You're playing with fire. Be careful it doesn't burn everything you love. Her assistant was followed home. A witness who agreed to testify against Boone recanted within 48 hours. Still, Jasmine did not stop. The folder Jasmine held wasn't thick, not yet, but it was dense with power. Each paper was a story. A silenced cry. A redacted report. Each line she read painted a pattern so consistent it felt orchestrated. And it was. There, hidden between lines of bureaucratic language, were traces of Boone's history. Cases dismissed. Cameras malfunctioning. Witnesses refusing to testify. Always the same neighborhoods. Always the same kinds of victims. She knew what she had to do. Jasmine stood in front of the media again, this time flanked by families. Behind her stood the mother of Malik James, a man in a wheelchair from a prior Boone arrest, and a retired police sergeant who had resigned in protest years ago. I am officially submitting a motion to unseal all records involving Officer Travis Boone's arrests over the past 10 years, she announced. And I demand a special review board be formed, independent of the Charleston Police Department, to oversee this investigation. The reporter's questions surged like waves, but Jasmine stayed centered. Her eyes met the lens of a camera. To the victims watching, to the families still waiting for answers, I see you. I believe you, and I will not let this silence continue. The city trembled. Charleston had always prided itself on order, on tradition. But now that pride became its shield, and Jasmine had pierced it. A council meeting was called behind closed doors. City officials argued. Some wanted to dismiss her claims as politically motivated. Others feared the public's rage. One whispered what the rest were too afraid to say. If we dig, what else will we find? But Jasmine had already begun digging. Not with shovels, with truth. With names. In a dark room, she unrolled a board with dozens of photos, lines drawn with red thread, a web of officers, judges, prosecutors. A pattern of protection and abuse. What do you see here? She asked her team. One replied. A system designed to protect itself. Another. A cartel in uniform. Jasmine returned home late that night. The air was thick with summer heat, but her body felt ice cold. A letter was taped to her door. No name, no return address. It read, "We buried better than you. You're next." She didn't flinch. Instead, she walked inside, opened her laptop, and began writing her next address to the city. The next day, she stood in front of Charleston's courthouse once more. I received a threat last night, she declared. And let me be clear. That is not silence, it is confession. When Jasmine finally met Malik James in person, he was quiet. 17 now. Eyes like glass, not fragile, but reflective. He looked at her as though unsure whether she was real. I thought no one would ever ask about what happened, he said softly. Jasmine smiled, gently. I'm not here to ask. I'm here to listen. He told his story in pieces. The swing of the baton. The chokehold. The look in Boone's eyes. How the arrest report claimed he was aggressive. How the bruises were labeled self-inflicted. No one believed him, not even his school counselor. But you do? He asked. I always did, Jasmine said. Even before I knew your name. She asked for his permission to share his testimony publicly. He nodded slowly. I don't want money, he said. I just don't want people to forget. They won't, she promised. Not anymore. Other names followed. More families stepped forward. A pattern emerged. Jasmine's campaign transformed from a lone crusade to a full-blown movement. Cities nearby took notice. Churches organized prayer circles. Universities invited Jasmine to speak. Retired officers, once silent, began to talk. Even within the police force, a few brave souls began submitting anonymous letters. We tried to report him. We were ignored. I was told to delete the footage. Internal affairs is a joke. Every revelation lit another match. The walls were shaking, but the system wasn't done fighting. Just as Jasmine was preparing to file her official federal motion, news came. The archive room of Charleston PD had suffered an electrical fire. Only one room, one file cabinet. Guess which one? All cases involving Boone. Gone. At least, that's what they claimed. Jasmine stared at the news broadcast. Her jaw tightened. She didn't speak, didn't scream. She just whispered. Then we rebuild the truth by testimony. She held up her list. 27 names. All ready to speak. All ready to stand. If the records burned, the voices would rise. It wasn't just Boone on trial anymore. It was Charleston. Jasmine filed her motion. The courtroom overflowed with press. Boone's defense argued bias. They claimed Jasmine was unfit due to her emotional involvement. She smiled bitterly. I'm involved because I care. If that disqualifies me, then this system is already broken. One by one, witnesses testified. Malik, the man in the wheelchair, a former dispatcher, a police academy instructor, each one told a version of the same truth. Boone acted like a man above the law, because he was treated like one. Jasmine asked only one question of each. Were you ever listened to before today? Each shook their head. The courtroom was breathless. Reporters gripped their pens. Victims clasped each other's hands. Jasmine sat, her hands steepled, eyes fixed on the jury foreman. 12 people, 12 hearts, 12 chances to restore what had been broken for years. The foreman stood. In the matter of Officer Travis Boone, we, the jury, find the defendant. He paused. 1,000 heartbeats skipped. Guilty. The silence cracked. The gasp from the gallery felt like wind rushing through old oak trees. Jasmine closed her eyes, not to cry, but to anchor the moment. To feel the gravity of what had just been spoken into existence. Guilty. The word didn't erase the years of silence. Didn't heal every scar, but it was a beginning. Boone stood still, face drained of all color. For the first time in decades, he no longer looked like a man shielded by a system. He looked small, mortal. The judge looked up from his bench, as if realizing the weight of what had just been laid at his feet. This court recommends a full departmental review, he said. Effective immediately. Justice didn't echo in the courtroom that day, it landed. And it stayed. The news spread like lightning across the country. Charleston officer convicted. Jasmine Crockett breaks silence barrier. Courtroom justice sets precedent for systemic reform. Every major network ran the story. Hashtags filled the internet. Hashtag justice for Malik. Hashtag Crockett verdict. Hashtag truth on trial. In neighborhoods across Charleston, strangers wept and embraced. One grandmother, who had lost her son years ago to an unsolved police beating, whispered into a camera crew's mic. She did it for all of us. But Jasmine wasn't done. Not yet. The trial was just the match. She needed to burn down the structure that allowed men like Boone to rise unchecked. An emergency city council vote was held. Jasmine stood at the podium, no longer a stranger in the room, now the force every official had to reckon with. "I am submitting a bill to create a civilian oversight board," she said. "One with subpoena power, independent funding, no more internal cover-ups." Some council members balked. "This could damage morale," one said. "Morale?" Jasmine repeated. "What about the people buried by your silence?" A woman in the back clapped once. Then another. Then the entire room stood. The vote passed. And a new pillar of accountability was built in Charleston. That night, Jasmine sat alone on her front steps. The cicadas hummed. The moon sat heavy above the street. Her phone buzzed. A text from Malik. "I saw the vote. Thank you for giving me back my voice." She stared at it for a long time. Then typed, "No, you gave it to me." Weeks passed. The city adapted. Police academies began revising their ethics curriculum, using Boone's trial as a case study. In high schools, teachers printed out Jasmine's closing remarks. Students debated them in class. "What does justice mean?" one teacher asked. A student raised her hand. "It means doing what's right even when it costs everything." The city of Charleston installed a mural across the old courthouse wall, the same one where Boone once stood smug and untouchable. It featured Jasmine Crockett, arm extended toward a crowd, standing tall beneath the phrase, "Justice doesn't flinch." Tourists visited, locals nodded as they passed. But Jasmine never took pride in the image. Because her work wasn't finished. The system hadn't fallen, but it had been shaken. Its walls cracked, its silence broken, and she had become the hammer. In her home office, Jasmine kept a letter she wrote long before the verdict. A letter she'd penned to herself the night after the slap. It read, "If you fall, fall forward. If they silence you, let your silence roar. And if they forget you, fight harder, until remembering becomes a duty. You were not chosen because it would be easy. You were chosen because no one else could carry this flame." She folded it carefully, placed it back in the drawer, and got back to work. Years later, a young black girl stood in front of that mural in Charleston. She wore a backpack. In her hand, a worn copy of a book. Crockett, the woman who wouldn't bow. Her mother whispered, "She changed everything, baby. So you could walk into any courtroom and not be afraid." The girl nodded. And somewhere, across the world, Jasmine Crockett stood in another courthouse, watching another wall tremble. Because justice wasn't a moment. It was a mission, and hers had only just begun. And a new pillar of accountability was built in Charleston. That night, Jasmine sat alone on her front steps. The cicadas hummed. The moon sat heavy above the street. Her phone buzzed. A text from Malik. "I saw the vote. Thank you for giving me back my voice." She stared at it for a long time. Then typed, "No, you gave it to me." Weeks passed. The city adapted. Police academies began revising their ethics curriculum, using Boone's trial as a case study. In high schools, teachers printed out Jasmine's closing remarks. Students debated them in class. "What does justice mean?" one teacher asked. A student raised her hand. "It means doing what's right even when it costs everything." The city of Charleston installed a mural across the old courthouse wall, the same one where Boone once stood smug and untouchable. It featured Jasmine Crockett, arm extended toward a crowd, standing tall beneath the phrase, "Justice doesn't flinch." Tourists visited, locals nodded as they passed. But Jasmine never took pride in the image. Because her work wasn't finished. The system hadn't fallen, but it had been shaken. Its walls cracked, its silence broken, and she had become the hammer. In her home office, Jasmine kept a letter she wrote long before the verdict. A letter she'd penned to herself the night after the slap. It read, "If you fall, fall forward. If they silence you, let your silence roar. And if they forget you, fight harder, until remembering becomes a duty. You were not chosen because it would be easy. You were chosen because no one else could carry this flame. She folded it carefully, placed it back in the drawer, and got back to work. Years later, a young black girl stood in front of that mural in Charleston. She wore a backpack. In her hand, a worn copy of a book. Crockett, the woman who wouldn't bow. Her mother whispered, "She changed everything, baby. So you could walk into any courtroom and not be afraid." The girl nodded, and somewhere, across the world, Jasmine Crockett stood in another courthouse, watching another wall tremble. Because justice wasn't a moment. It was a mission, and hers had only just begun.